to the Empowered Birth series, where I go deep into everything that you need to know to plan and get your true natural birth. And today's topic is all about choosing your reading material carefully. Now, I'm not going to go into the top books that I recommend. In fact, that's going to be another video entirely. This one is all about discerning your reading material because, there is a lot out there on natural birth. There's a lot of books on pregnancy. If you go to any library or any bookstore, you can usually find a parenting section that's just got shelves and shelves and shelves of books. And the question you need to be asking yourself is, which books are actually right for you? And it's not what you think. Going into a bookstore or going on Amazon or taking recommendations from moms in the mom groups or going to the local library is not going to guarantee that you're going to get the right reading material. And your reading material really matters. Go back and check out my other video on the 26 things that you need to know if this is your first time planning a true natural birth, or you can get the full list by going to empoweringmomsbirth.com/freebies. This is, again, a quick overview of the 26 things that you need to know if this is your first time planning a true natural birth. And of course, you need to pick your reading material very carefully. The reason for this is because of my 5-pillar system and how you need to optimize all 5. You need the right mindset, the right education, the right environment, the right facilitators, and the right support. Now, if you're reading a book that's typical in mainstream, this affects your right mindset. This affects the things that you start to become afraid or anxious about. And this also affects what you think is actually possible. Now, our birth culture has unfortunately been ingrained in a culture of fear and misinformation when it comes to true natural birth. And there's a lot of reasons for why people say things the way they do. There's a lot of reasons why there's a lot of fear and misunderstandings and misconceptions. And really what I talk about inside my book, Your Empowered Birth, is why we've gotten into this mess in the first place. Go check out some of my other videos on the right facilitators and the right environment to really understand this. Because if you don't feel safe to birth, if you don't believe that you can do it, and if you're getting the wrong education, this is all going to compound and you're going to put yourself in information overwhelm. You're going to start doubting yourself. And then you're still going to come into the mom groups and you're like, I've read all the books, but why am I still afraid? Well, the truth is because it's not just about the books that you're reading. It's about discerning whether that book is even good for you when it comes to planning your true natural birth. Because, there's so many titles out there and there's so many recommendations and there's so many popular books. But when I was a first-time mom, I was reading all of the books and I recognized that it was actually affecting my mindset. And a lot of the education that I was getting was perpetuating the natural birth traps. Go check out some of my other videos on natural birth traps, or you can read more about that inside Your Empowered Birth. So, how do you pick the right reading material? Well, in today's video, I'm going to share the 3 top tips for discerning whether a book is actually going to help you have a true natural birth, or if it's going to perpetuate the natural birth traps, lead you down the wrong path, and then ultimately you give up on your dream birth. You end up going for that induction. You end up going for that C-section. You maybe hire a care provider who isn't really supportive. But because of the fact that you're reading the same thing over and over again that's being perpetuated, or somebody said a book was a good book for natural birth, but it's still problematic, you don't know that up front. So I'm going to make this super easy for you by telling you about the top things that I'm looking for when I'm deciding whether to add a book to my collection as a resource or add it as just a cautionary tale where I'm drawing from the information to counteract it. Because, I do have some books in my collection that I would not recommend my clients read. There's a lot of books that I pull from the library that I already know are not going to help anyone have a true natural birth. However, it's important that we get both sides, because when you recognize what's being said that's perpetuating the same natural birth traps, the more likely it is that you're going to be able to combat it. So I go the opposite direction to go and see what's not working. And then I pull from that to show what actually is working. And as you know, I have 3 paths for you getting the empowered birth method, because I am committed to you having an empowered birth, whether you work with me directly or not, whether you get my book or my courses. Because when you have an empowered birth, you're an empowered mom for life, and nobody can take your power away from you ever again. So, what are these 3 things? Okay. So the first thing that you want to be looking for is who wrote this book. Now, a lot of birth books are written by MDs or RNs, or a lot of people that have titles and credentials to basically show they know their stuff, right? However, if you've checked out some of my other videos on how to hire your care provider, then you already know where there's a problem with that, because fish can't see the water that they swim in. And if natural birth has been appropriated by the medical system to mean anything from vaginal to unmedicated birth, and they're still controlling it, they're not really allowing it to follow its physiological process, then what happens is you get a very biased, skewed version of what you need to know. I'm also going to tell you that it doesn't matter what expert said it. You still need to be discerning. And that's going to tie into the rest of what I'm going to be teaching you. But first, you really need to ask that question. Who wrote this book? Who is this person? Are they a midwife? And if they are a midwife, what kind of midwife are they? Are they the kind of midwife that practices in the hospital and sees the problems and has deliberately written a book to counterbalance that? Or is it someone who is still kind of indoctrinated into the system and thinks that birth can only happen if they're there? Same thing for a doctor. I'm not going to tell you not to read a book by an OB or an RN or anybody in the medical system. Because you know what? There are some people that have those credentials and also respect the physiological process. There are a lot of people that have podcasts or they influence and they understand that the physiological process should not be messed with. However, they also have skills to handle emergencies in the highest level where they can do a C-section. That doesn't mean that they're necessarily going to steer you wrong and put you away from your natural birth. However, again, you need to be careful. What is their character? The best way to figure this out is, are they telling their story within this book? If they are just writing out the facts and evidence, but they are not showing you who they are as a person, it doesn't matter how much data is being put there. Every single piece of research information out there is interpreted by somebody. So if you're just looking at the numbers and you're just looking at the data and you're drawing conclusions, however, you do not also explain where your own hidden biases are, don't trust that information. Now, inside Your Empowered Birth, I am completely transparent. I say, I believe that natural birth can unfold in its own way, and maybe in 10 to 15% of the time, we call in medical reinforcement. However, it should not be the default. I'm very clear in that. I do not believe that the medical system needs to control birth. I do not believe that we should have to go that route. We do not need to medicalize birth. However, a lot of people think that birth needs to be heavily controlled, and it's always dangerous if it happens without a midwife present. And that's not true either. So there's 2 extremes. One, it's always a medical event and you always need to be careful just in case. And the other one is birth always works and you never need medical intervention. And medical intervention is bad and wrong, and we can't look at that. I'm kind of in the middle. I believe that natural birth can and should be the default. Because when you mess with a physiological process, you're messing with a whole bunch of hormones, you're messing with the bonding process, and it's perpetuating a lot of trauma that is unnecessary. There's so much that's lost when you have a medicalized birth. So my clients, when I'm working with them, they understand that. I give them the information. I will provide books for them that outline all of the pros and cons and the risks and benefits. And typically, those books have the numbers as well. And typically, those books are also written by people that understand, as I do, where they're not in one extreme direction. Because when you're in one extreme direction, you're missing things. So I typically pick up books by midwives and doulas, but I have also been known to read books by doctors. And again, it really depends. Who is this person? So once you know what their stance is and you know what their story is, because there's a lot of midwives that'll say things like, I free birthed all 5 kids at home. And this one had complications and this one had complications, and I still was able to do it. That is very trustable data because not only did they have those babies at home, but they also were able to manage things that typically in a hospital setting would be a big red flag emergency that they would have controlled and done all of the things. In contrast, if somebody says, I only ever had my babies in the hospital, I've never had a home birth, and they're trying to teach natural birth, they're missing something. Because they've only ever had hospital births, they are missing something. That's why you really need to be discerning. And then you also need to recognize, like, have they processed enough of their own birth trauma to be able to be objective in areas where they need to be objective? Now, you don't have to be completely detached from emotion. However, you do need to have worked through your trauma. Go back and watch my videos on how to hire your doula and how to hire your care provider, because these will give you more of an idea of the psyche that's needed, the mentality that's needed when you're looking at who you're actually learning from. Now, that goes to number 2. What's in this book? So, you cannot get everything from just one book. And the best books are the ones that specialize in a certain area instead of trying to go broad. The more generalized things are, the more you lose the actual nuances, the more you lose the translation of how to have a natural birth. And instead, now you're picking up this book and it's every single thing that can possibly go wrong. It's like when you write your birth plan. And of course, the empowered birth method of writing your birth plan is you aim for your true natural birth, you aim for your dream birth, and then you create backup plans. But you don't put that on the main plan. So if you want to know more about complications, then you want a book that kind of specializes in that area and tells you. A really good one, of course, is Why Induction Matters by Rachel Reed. She really goes into great detail of all the different complications where induction would be recommended. And she goes into the actual numbers and she brings in anecdotal stories from people and their experiences of induction. And she's also brought in differing perspectives. Do you induce or do you not? The choice is left up to you. Instead of telling you which direction you need to go, the choice is left up to you. There's also a chapter on physiological birth because Rachel Reed really understands physiological birth. In fact, her deeper dive book, Reclaiming Childbirth as a Rite of Passage, has even more content on physiological birth, as well as how we got into this mess in the cultural dynamic and within the medical system. So you can kind of pull the curtain back. So you really need to understand what's in the book. Now, another example I'll just say is Your Empowered Birth. It is not your typical birth book. It does not tell you anything about breathing exercises or coping mechanisms for pain or any of the typical things that you would see in a natural birth book. However, it is a natural birth book because it is your roadmap on how to plan a true natural birth. It is your roadmap to understand why things go wrong And it is your roadmap to help you to map out what is right for you. And I mean, you can go and check this out yourself. You just go to the playlists on my YouTube channel, and there's actually a playlist where I'm reading out the book to you. So you don't even have to buy the book. But I do recommend, if you want a physical copy, just go and get it off of Amazon, because there's just something about being able to hold a book in your hand and flip to the pages where you want to go anytime, and to highlight things if you like to mark up the book. In fact, I actually encourage you to mark up that book, which normally I don't like to mark up books, but this one, there's just so many exercises, there's so many notes that you could take to help you find your path. Because I believe that you deserve to have the kind of birth you want, not the one that other people say is safer, not the one that other people say is appropriate. They don't get to decide for you. And we can get into information overwhelm when we're just looking for books to tell us how to birth. So this is like the anti telling you how to birth book. And at the same time, I do have that component of the right education. And there's questions you can ask yourself to see what additional resources you need. Now, I'm also going to say that you don't just want a typical how-to manual for birth. You also want to bring in something maybe for nutrition. If you're really looking for something on nutrition, there is a pregnancy nutrition book that will help you do that. Or maybe you have special complications and you need a book that's going to help you with that, to manage those things. Because the medical system, they really look at pathology and then trying to fix a problem. But if you're looking for a more holistic method, then you're going to want to search for a book that helps you do that. And if there isn't one available, there might be videos, there might be classes, there might be something else out there. But of course, for the purposes of this masterclass, I'm really just going to explain to you that you really need to figure out what kind of education you need and then find books that offer you that. And as you can see, I have a whole bunch of titles behind me. I have even more on my Kindle, and I'm constantly pulling from them because it depends on what my clients need in the moment or what I'm currently looking for. There's Natural Hospital Birth by Cynthia Gabriel if you're looking for a book that kind of helps you navigate the medical system. But if you're looking for a completely hands-off home birth, then you want Home Birth on Your Own Terms by Heather Baker. And if you're looking for something that's going to show you more about the physiological birth process, then Rachel Reed's book, Reclaiming Childbirth as a Rite of Passage. I cannot stress enough how amazing this book is. There's also another one behind me that you can't really see, Painless Childbirth. And this one kind of goes into a more spiritual aspect. And even though I wasn't very woo-woo back when I was having my second baby, I read this book from cover to cover. I'd gotten it from the library, and it did help me understand things. It even goes into the chakra system, which at the time I didn't quite understand. So I'm going to go back in and I'm going to reread this book at a certain point. There's also Orgasmic Birth. There's Give Birth Like a Feminist. If you're concerned about breech, there's a book by my friend Haley Pierce that's actually called Breech. So when you understand this, when you really look at this of what's in the book, the next thing that you're going to want to do is, if you're looking on Amazon, you can't really do this too well. Maybe they have an outline, maybe they don't. You can go and get samples and see what's in the table of contents, because that usually does show up if you download a sample on your Kindle. If you're not really looking to commit to getting a physical copy of a book and they do have Kindle, Kindle's usually cheaper. And I mean, if you're spending $10, it's not as big of a deal as if you're spending like $30 to $40 on a really big, dense book. You can highlight things and then you have that in your collection. Often, if I'm not sure if I want a book in my collection for space-wise, or just because I'm not sure if I want to spend that money for a physical copy yet, I get the Kindle version first. Then I read through it and I'm like, okay, this is a good book. If you're going to the library and you take out that book, you're again wanting to look at the table of contents and see what's actually in the book. Because once you understand the different headlines, you understand the different sections, you can kind of get an idea. Another little trick is to read the first paragraph or even the first sentence of each paragraph to skim to see if a book is actually going to help you. Because usually it's within the first paragraph or within the first sentence or the first sections. You look at the headlines and you just flip through the pages, you can get an idea, is this book actually worth it? Or are they trying to scare me into a medically intervention birth? Now, another little trick that you want to try, if you're especially reading a book that's written by a doctor, is go and check out what they're saying about birth locations. If you're looking for a generalized pregnancy or natural birth book and you look at the locations, it's like where to give birth is usually a typical headline. If they're saying anything negative about home birth, or they're saying that you always have to have a birth attendant present because of XYZ emergency happening, it's not a true natural birth guidebook, because there needs to be that possibility open that you could birth your baby yourself. Because even if you're planning to go to the hospital to birth, or even if you're planning to call the midwife to your birth, stuff happens. You don't want to be in a panic thinking that everybody else has to be able to take care of birth or it's just going to be a disaster. You need to be so confident that if you were in the middle of nowhere, you'd be like, I've got this. I can birth my baby easily. When you have that mindset that you've got this and you can birth your baby easily, this also gets you out of that fear-based mindset where you feel like you have to fight, beg, or compromise with the medical system to get anything close to a natural birth. Because if they say, we're not going to deliver your baby if you don't let us do XYZ, you can be like, well, I don't actually need you to deliver my baby because babies are not pizzas. I birth them. So I could do this on my own. I'd like your support. But if you're not going to support me, then I know I need to go elsewhere. It shows you who's actually supportive. Again, go check out some of my other videos on that. And this is a good little segue to get into to tell you about the birth advocacy report. Because when you understand about the 5 different types of resistance, you can also kind of uncover this when you're reading a book to see which categories people might fall into. Because, you know, if somebody is just overly controlling and they're withholding information, they're being coercive. They're gaslighting you. They believe that their way is the only way, and they're not leaving any room for your story to unfold. So if you want that report, though, to help you with birth advocacy, you just go to empoweringmomsbirth.com/toolkit, put in your name and email. Automatically, you will be redirected to a masterclass. You will also receive access to the Empowered Birth Toolkit. Now, the Empowered Birth Toolkit has this report in it, the Birth Advocacy Report, but it also has additional resources that I rotate periodically so that eventually, if you stay on the newsletter and you stay subscribed and you stay in my community, you could technically get everything. This ties again into how I run everything in my business, where you have a free path. The reason for that is because sometimes you're a little bit curious and you're like, I'd like to get Academy, or I'd like to get this course, or I'd like to get this book, or I'd like to jump into coaching, or I'd like to do these classes. But at the same time, I don't really know if it's right for me. And I don't really want to invest the money right now. I kind of want to check this out. So rather than put everything behind a paywall, which a lot of people tend to do, because it's like, you're not going to get anything good unless you purchase something. But then what if you purchase it and it's not right for you? This is why I love the idea of a library, because you can go in and you can test out a book, you can borrow the book, you don't have to pay any money. So you just go through and it's like, is this book even for you? So I kind of created this Empowered Birth Toolkit, almost like a lending library, where you can get the resources and you also are subscribed to the newsletter, where I go into a deep dive on multiple topics every single week to help you in getting your empowered birth. So again, all you have to do to get this is to go to empoweringmomsbirth.com/toolkit. The most powerful resource in there is the birth advocacy report, and it never goes away. But the other resources that I put in, anything from releasing fear, meditations, workbooks to help you work through your fear. Sometimes I even put entire course modules inside of this toolkit because, as I said, I am committed to you having an empowered birth, whether you work with me or not, whether you get my paid programs or not. And all I ask in return is that you pay it forward. Like, share, subscribe to this channel, pass it on to others, tell other moms where to get this toolkit so they can have access to it. And make sure that you comment and ask questions as well, especially if you are subscribed to the newsletter. Because, some of my best ideas come from my clients, but they also come from my empowered birth community. So if you do have questions, I'm just going to say you can reach out. Just email me at hello@empoweringmomsbirth.com, and either myself or one of my team members will get back to you within 1 to 2 business days. And that leads to number 3, because, one of the things about any content or any books is that you really need to know who it's for. And this is why I have my free path to empowered birth. Because if you know that this is for you and you want to have a deeper dive, you don't just want to go on the surface, then you know that signing up for the Empowered Birth Toolkit is going to help you at that deeper level. And if you're the self-study type and you'd like to get a course, you now know of my teaching style. You now know what I stand for. You know that I can go 10 layers deep on any one of these topics that I bring up. And if you have questions, my door is open. So you need to look at the same thing when it comes to who is the audience for a book. Because, authors really write for their audience and they write for themselves. And if somebody is writing for a particular audience and they don't quite know you, it might not align. There's a lot of books that are written with the idea that moms don't know anything, or they'd rather get the epidural, or they'd rather get the C-section. So those books are kind of catering to them. They're catering to the moms that would just go with their doctor's recommendation, no questions asked. They're not really catering to those who think outside the box. And this is exactly why I created Your Empowered Birth in the first place. It's because I recognized that there was one direction where the midwives and doulas were writing these natural birth books, and they all were saying, birth is wonderful, stay away from the medical system, you don't want to go in there. And I knew that. I knew I didn't want to go in the medical system. But what happens when something in your plan changes? What happens if you're being medically gaslit? What happens if your partner isn't supportive? These questions were not answered. So when I was told that my baby was not very big and he was small for dates and I'd have to now have a hospital birth, I panicked because everything on the medical side of the hospital births was telling me all of the tests and interventions that I'd have to have. And I didn't want any of that either. There was no in between. So when you recognize that a book is really tailored to a specific audience, then you need to also be asking the question, is this even right for me? Because there can be a book out there, it's like Pregnant Woman's Guide for 35 and up. And you're like, oh, that's for me. I'm 35 and up. But then you go and open that book and it says home birth is super dangerous and you don't want to attempt it. And because you're 35, you're probably going to need to induce. And here's all of the things that could go wrong because you're 35. And it's just a big high risk label in book form. Is that going to help you have a true natural birth? No, it's not. In fact, I've read books like that. They kind of tick me off a little because at the same time, you could have a completely natural birth experience. There's women that I've helped in their 40s have completely hands-off births. So in that vein, even if the book says for moms who have a breech baby, for moms who have twins, for moms who are 35 and up, for moms who want to have a natural birth, Is it really that? You need to dig deeper than the surface. Because, if we look at this in the dating world or in the world of like when a man says he wants to settle down and he wants a wife, and you think, oh, yeah, he wants to settle down, he wants to have kids. But does his vision align with yours? Now, if you love your partner and you're like, yeah, we are in sync on everything and our vision like aligns, that is absolutely fantastic. And I'm really, really happy for you. However, at the same time, there are a lot of marriages where moms are in those marriages thinking, what the hell did I marry? Right? But it's like he said he wanted to settle down. He said he wanted to have kids. I didn't realize at the time until we had kids that actually I have one child or I have two children plus an overgrown child. And that's one thing that I thought, oh, well, my partner wants to have kids, he wants to have a family, but I didn't look below the surface to see what being a wife really meant to him, what being a mother really meant to him. So you need to have those conversations, not only when you're choosing your care provider or figuring out how your partner can support you better, or when you're hiring a doula. Go back and watch some of my other master classes on that, or read your Empowered Birth as well. But this also translates to your reading material, because when you're picking up a book on natural birth, if there's no actual definition of what natural is, it's probably the store-bought, preservative-laden, frozen dessert version of natural birth. Or it's the version that it is physiological birth. However, there is no middle ground to say how to advocate for yourself. Now, again, don't get me wrong. Books are great. And sometimes those books are really helpful. I'm not knocking the author and I'm not knocking the book because, I'm an author myself. I'm going to be the first to admit my book is not for everyone. My book is not for the people who just would rather listen to their doctor. My book is for the mom who has either already gone through that system or heard all of the horror stories and doesn't want that kind of experience and is like, I don't want anybody to touch me. I'm planning a home birth, or I'm planning to hire a midwife, or I'm planning to have a natural birth and I don't want the epidural. But maybe you're not navigating the system correctly because you haven't been taught to. And our birth culture doesn't really support that. It continues to perpetuate the natural birth traps. So I wrote this book as basically, hey, this map that you keep following is screwing you over, and I'm tired of seeing you get screwed over. And there's a better way, and it's a more intuitive way. There's journal prompts that you can also go through. So if you don't like doing the work, maybe I'm not for you. My stuff isn't for you, because if you're just watching the videos, that's great. That's one level. However, if you're not taking action and you're not implementing and you're not asking those questions, it's not going to work for you. You're just asking me to feed you information, but you're not going to actually ask yourself what's right. So everything that I teach, even though I'm giving you information, I want you to put it through your lens, not mine, not your partners, not your doulas, not your doctors, not your midwives, not your mother-in-law, not what your mother experienced, not what your sister experienced, not what your best friend experienced, not what all the moms in the mom groups are saying, your lens. So when you have an empowered birth, it's really focusing that you are your own best expert. No matter what book you're reading, I want you to have that one takeaway. This book that you're reading or the books that others are recommending may not work for you. And that's okay. That needs to be okay. So if you've read all the books and you're like, I don't understand why this isn't working for me, well, maybe it's because those books just weren't meant for you. And that needs to be okay. You're not doing anything wrong. In fact, you're doing everything exactly the way you need to do it. So if you feel that information that is given to you does not sit right with you, that is an indicator that you need to go elsewhere. And, I'm happy to help you with that because I am committed to you having an empowered birth, whether you work with me any further or not. If my stuff is not able to work for you, I do have people within my network that I could direct you to. I could give you an idea. I could give you some clarity on where you might need to look for some information. And if anything, I can just be a sounding board for you. I can just sit there and I can listen. Like you can send me an email, hello@empoweringmomsbirth.com, and I will support you. You can put it in the comments as well. However, I'm just going to let you know that I don't check the comments every single day. But if you send me an email, I will get back to you within 1 to 2 business days because that comes right up onto my phone and it gives me a notification saying you have an email. If you put it on YouTube or on any of my social media, I'm not getting those notifications as fast. So I just want to let you know, if you want to get a question answered, if you really want some support, I am here for you. And, there's a lot of questions inside of Your Empowered Birth. There's a lot of questions inside of the workbooks guided to help you to navigate what is right for you and to sort through the information overwhelm. So that even if you read something in a book and it scares you, you can work through that and decide if that actually resonates or if it's just fear being put on you that doesn't actually apply to you. Okay, so we have covered the 3 things that you really need to know when it comes to selecting your reading material and whether a book is actually right for you. So I'm just going to do a quick recap. So again, number 1 is that you need to know who wrote the book. Was it a midwife? Was it an OB? Was it a nurse? Was it a doula? And what is their overall birth philosophy and what's their story behind how they got into the work that they're doing and why that book even exists? If you don't know the answers to those questions and you can't really follow what their philosophy is, then it's probably not going to help you have a true natural birth, especially if they've only ever given birth at home and they never had any complications ever, and they never had anything come up. They're probably extremely, extremely fortunate, or they're lying to you. I'm a Scorpio. I'm very skeptical. There's usually 1 or 2 things that people are just not going to share because it doesn't align with the image that they want to project, that it's always easy, and they just want to sell copies of their book. As opposed to being completely transparent and being like, you know what? Whether they buy this book or they pick it up at the library or whatever, like I want them to actually get the information. So I have given my story inside of Your Empowered Birth, and I had 2 births that were natural. One, I was having a true natural birth in the hospital, and I was fighting an uphill battle to do it the whole time. So I was able to see what happens when you say no. And then I was also a birth advocate for a number of years. So I was hearing the stories of the moms that also said no, that had similar values to me. And I was also hearing the stories from the side of the midwives and the doulas that were supporting, and even nurses and doctors that were very frustrated within the system. And they'd say, even though my client thinks that they had a natural birth, I could see the gaslighting happening, and I'm just waiting for that other shoe to drop for them to process their trauma a year later or 3 years later, and it's going to haunt them. It's going to come back because what happened, like, I just know. I've been in this long enough to know that it's coming up because that's what happened with my midwife, is that she knew that I was traumatized. I didn't know I was traumatized right away, but she knew, and she kept inviting me to this birth trauma group. And I'm like, I don't think it's for me. I didn't have a C-section. I don't have any problems with breastfeeding. I didn't have an induction. I didn't have any medical intervention during my birth. Like, why would I have nothing to complain about, but I did. And she said, if you feel that this was traumatic to you, if you feel like you were robbed of something, then that's your story. Like, you have a right to express that. And yeah, I was robbed. I was robbed of my experience. And even with my home birth, there were things that I wouldn't do again. At the same time, if you are not able to validate those feelings, if you are not able to have somebody speak that back to you, if they're just going to brush it under the rug, they're not the right person for you. They're not the right author for you. It's not the right book. It's just going to continue to gaslight you and talk you into believing something that you really don't believe. So you need to know who wrote it and what their philosophy is. The next thing is you need to know what's in it. Is it actually information that's going to help you get where you want to go? Or does this information feel too dense and it's not exactly what you need? Because, books are great, but they're still only focused on one thing. And Your Empowered Birth is an excellent book if you're looking for your roadmap. If you're looking for breathing techniques, no, that's not the book for you. If you're looking for hypnobirthing, no, my book is not for that. So if you're looking for a hypnobirthing book and somebody says, what recommendations would you give for somebody looking to have a natural birth? And you really mean, I'm looking for specific things on hypnobirthing. The more specific you get on what you're looking for, the more you're going to find the titles that resonate with what you're looking for. So I won't get offended if somebody says, well, Your Empowered Birth is great, but that's not really what I'm looking for right now. That's fine. That's why I have other videos. That's why I also bring in other guest speakers. Wisdom comes from multiple perspectives, and you can always reach out to me and say, hey, I'm looking for something specifically about this. If I have something created, I'll give it to you. But if I don't have it, somebody else does, and I'm happy to send you there. So I want you to understand that. It's like, you need to know what's in the book. And finally, you also need to know if this is even right for you. Because just because something has a title that says it's everything you need to know about natural birth, or it's everything you need to know about pregnancy after 35, or it's everything you need to know about just painless birth. You could have all of the painless birth tools in your arsenal, but if you go into a hospital that undermines everything, it's going to be painful and you're going to think the book doesn't work. When really the book was written for an audience that was staying at home and having a hands-off birth. So this is where Jenny got tripped up, is she read Ina May's Guide to Childbirth. Excellent book. I love it. But she was having an induction. And so she's like, I read the book, but nothing that they said happens in the book or in any childbirth happened to me. And I'm like, well, of course not. You had an induction. And she's like, well, why does that matter? And I'm like, it's a completely different ball game. You're no longer having a physiological birth. Like, the book you needed to have was Why Induction Matters. You needed to understand about the difference between physiological birth versus induced labor and recognize that there are so many different variations, that sometimes it works for some people and sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes it can be really traumatic. Like, if you had had that knowledge, well, I mean, if she'd had that knowledge, she wouldn't have ended up commenting in a mom group, and then we wouldn't have found each other. And then Jenny wouldn't have had her empowered birth. So you need to recognize, though, who is this book for? Because if it's not really for you, it doesn't matter how many people rave about it. It's not for you. And that needs to be okay. All right. So now that you know what to look for in a book, and I've given you some secret tips on what to look for in the actual content to see if maybe there's a bias against home birth or natural birth, I'm just going to let you know that the next video, I'm going to share some of my favorite titles of books that I do recommend that you read. I'm going to give you a little overview of what's in them so you can then choose your own adventure. But for now, thank you so much for watching. Remember, if you found value in this, please like, share, subscribe to this channel, pay it forward, tell other moms where to get the Empowered Birth Toolkit. Make sure you get some of the extra resources that are on my website, empoweringmomsbirth.com. And if you are a self-starter and you would like to do the self-study path and get your Empowered Birth Academy, you can either go to my website, empoweringmomsbirth.com/academy to learn more, or if you have any questions, you can just reach out to me, hello@empoweringmomsbirth.com. And somebody on my team or myself will get back to you within 1 to 2 business days. So thank you again for watching. Happy Empowered Birth Journey, and I'll talk to you soon. Bye now.